The Red Wedding, the sack of King's Landing, the reign of Joffrey. These moments defined a generation of Westerosi history, and they were all bankrolled and orchestrated by the same golden vault. If House Lannister had collapsed decades earlier, the Seven Kingdoms wouldn't have suddenly become peaceful. They would have become unrecognizable. Before the era of the Lions, the Lannisters were a laughingstock. Tytos Lannister was a man so eager for approval that he allowed his Bannermen to mock him openly, leaving his family's debts uncollected and their authority in tatters. Tywin Lannister reversed that decline through calculated brutality. He dismantled his rivals and built the military and political structure that effectively ran the realm for 20 years, while the Mad King spiraled into paranoia. If Tywin dies before he can finish that work, if he falls in battle against his own rebellious lords, House Lannister loses its mastermind before securing its dominance. Losing the Lannisters doesn't save the realm from conflict. It removes the only house rich enough to enforce order when the Targaryen dynasty inevitably fractures, ensuring that instead of one organized war, the continent breaks into a dozen localized ones. Without Tywin, the Westerlands remain a collection of bickering houses. The Reynes and Tarbecks continue to challenge the Lannisters, turning the gold-rich West into a permanent combat zone that consumes its own resources. This leaves the richest region of the continent paralyzed. When Robert Baratheon eventually rebels, he lacks the decisive Lannister betrayal that ended the war in our timeline. The siege of King's Landing becomes a long, bloody grind rather than a quick sack, leaving his victory fragile and his treasury empty. To secure a crown won through a much costlier war, Robert has to trade his hand for a different kind of stability. He can't marry a Lannister who doesn't have the power to help him. He might look to Highgarden for their vast food supplies to feed a starving capital, or to the Martells in an attempt to heal the wounds of the rebellion through a diplomatic union. By marrying someone like Margaery Tyrell, or a daughter of the Vale, the central driver of the War of the Five Kings is deleted. There is no incest scandal, no execution of Ned Stark, and no immediate civil war. But this structural piece is an illusion. Without a dominant central power like the Lannisters to fear, every ambitious house in Westeros begins to view the Iron Throne as a prize they can finally afford to take for themselves. For centuries, the Seven Kingdoms operated on a balance of power. The Lannisters, with their gold and military discipline, acted as the primary weight that held the ambitions of other great houses in check. Remove the lions, and House Tyrell effectively becomes the state. With the largest army and the only consistent food supply, they no longer have a rival capable of stopping them from dictating royal policy. The shift is even more dramatic in the south. Because Tywin wasn't there to order the murder of Elia Martell during the transition of power, the horrific crime that defined Dorne's hatred for the throne never happens. This effectively erases a bitter 30-year blood feud. Instead of plotting in secret for decades, House Martell remains a functional, respected part of the realm's political fabric. A politically stable Dorne, unburdened by the desire for revenge, would likely shift its loyalty back toward the Targaryens much earlier, seeing them as a more legitimate alternative to a Baratheon king who is increasingly dependent on the Tyrells. This creates a direct path for the exiled Daenerys Targaryen. She wouldn't be returning to a continent that hates her family's legacy. She would be arriving as a liberator invited by the Martells and the Tyrells, executing a swift takeover of a kingdom that has no unified Lannister army to defend it from her. Beyond the maps and the marriages, the absence of Tywin Lannister erases the specific people who shaped the fate of the world. Without Tywin's psychological abuse, Tyrion Lannister is never forced to develop the cynical, survivalist brilliance that made him the Hand of the King. He might be happier, but he is also politically irrelevant. That irrelevance has a cost. Without Tyrion, the defense of King's Landing against Stannis Baratheon fails. And if Tyrion disappears from history, Daenerys loses one of her most important advisors. Jaime Lannister, free from the pressure to be his father's heir, likely stays in the West to manage Casterly Rock. He never kills the Mad King, he never loses his hand. Jaime's future could look completely different, that eventually led him to fight for the living. And Cersei, lacking the platform of a queen, is never able to act on her paranoia. The Sept of Baelor is never destroyed, that the political maneuvering that held the capital together disappears with her. Erasing these people removes the cruelty they caused, but it also removes the most capable political minds in the realm. It leaves Westeros headed by leaders who haven't been hardened by the Lannister struggle for survival. We view the Lannisters as the villains, but their gold and their ruthlessness provided the only force capable of enforcing a continental peace. Without that force, the Seven Kingdoms spend decades bleeding themselves dry in small, regional wars over the power vacuum Tywin left behind. This endless internal bleeding happens exactly while a far more terrifying existential threat is slowly approaching from the deep north. In the world we know, the Lannisters were a hurdle to the defense of the living. But in a world without them, there is no unified realm left to defend. Instead, the White Walkers do not find a united kingdom waiting for them. They find only a broken collection of exhausted, bankrupt provinces. The history of Westeros suggests that while a family like the Lannisters can cause immense suffering, the only thing more dangerous than a ruthless ruler is a world where no one has the power to stop the fighting.